Ancient civilizations hid shocking taboos, sacred rituals, and forbidden secrets. Discover the unwritten rules that shaped their destiny and ask yourself, what mysteries still guide us today? You're stepping into ancient Rome's most sacred temple now, where Vestal Virgins tended eternal flames for 30 years, knowing that letting the fire die meant being buried alive in underground chambers. Hey friends, if you're settling in for this peaceful journey through history's hidden secrets, make sure you're comfortable. We have quite an adventure ahead. Around 700 BCE, Roman Vestal Virgins maintained the sacred fire of Vesta, goddess of hearth and home. These priestesses entered service at age 6 and could never marry, dedicating their entire lives to keeping Rome's spiritual flame burning. Those who broke their vow of chastity faced the most terrifying punishment, being sealed in underground chambers with only bread and water, left to contemplate their betrayal in absolute darkness. The gentle crackling of sacred flames that held the city's fate, the soft whisper of prayers offered to ensure Rome's eternal protection. When the fire died during barbarian invasions, Romans believed it predicted their empire's collapse, and history proved them right. What sacred responsibilities do we tend today that might determine whether entire civilizations rise or fall? Dear listeners, you're standing on ancient Mexican battlefields now, where Aztec warriors fought elaborate mock battles designed not to kill enemies, but to capture them alive for temple ceremonies. Around 1450 CE, Aztec nobility established Xochimilquistli, or Flower Wars, ritualized conflicts with neighboring city-states that served as training exercises and prisoner procurement events. These ceremonial battles followed strict rules. Warriors could only use obsidian clubs, copper weapons were forbidden, and killing enemies was considered dishonorable failure. Captured warriors faced months of luxurious treatment before their final temple ceremony, living as honored guests while psychologically preparing for their sacred destiny. Warriors who killed rather than captured enemies faced public shame and temporary exile from military service, learning restraint through social ostracism. The rhythmic beating of war drums that announced ritual combat, the gentle singing of captured warriors who achieved divine status through their sacrifice. These flower wars enabled Aztec expansion while maintaining the steady supply of prisoners needed for religious ceremonies that kept their gods satisfied. What conflicts in our lives might transform if we approach them as sacred ceremonies rather than battles to be won? You're entering ancient Babylon's ziggurat temples now, where sacred prostitutes performed religious duties that transformed physical intimacy into divine communion between mortals and gods. Around 2400 BCE, Mesopotamian temple prostitutes served as intermediaries between human worshippers and fertility deities, believing that sacred sexuality could channel divine energy into earthly realms. These holy practitioners underwent years of ritual training that included learning sacred dances, memorizing religious hymns, and mastering techniques for inducing spiritual transcendence through physical connection. Temple prostitutes who showed personal attachment or emotional preference for specific clients faced temporary isolation in monastery cells, learning to maintain spiritual objectivity through enforced solitude. The soft chanting of fertility hymns that blessed each sacred encounter, the gentle burning of frankincense that sanctified temple chambers. Sacred prostitution provided economic support for temples while offering worshippers direct access to divine fertility energy that was believed essential for agricultural success and community prosperity. How might we honor the sacred aspects of human intimacy if we approached physical connection as a form of prayer? Hey friends, you're deep in ancient British oak groves now, where Celtic druids performed human sacrifices during seasonal festivals, believing that willing deaths could guarantee nature's eternal cycle of rebirth. Around 100 BCE, Celtic druids conducted ritual sacrifices that volunteers eagerly sought, viewing sacred death as the highest honor and most direct path to divine immortality. Sacrifice volunteers underwent year-long purification processes that included fasting, meditation, and spiritual counseling to prepare their souls for transition to the other world. Those selected for sacrifice lived as honored community members during their final year, receiving the best food and shelter while gradually detaching from earthly concerns. Druids who performed incorrect ritual procedures faced lifetime banishment from sacred groves, losing their connection to the spiritual community that defined their entire identity. The gentle rustling of oak leaves that witnessed humanity's most sacred gift to nature. The soft murmur of final prayers offered before eternal transformation. These sacrificial rituals convinced Celts that their deaths directly influenced seasonal weather patterns, crop yields, and tribal prosperity. What are we willing to sacrifice today to ensure that future generations inherit a world that can sustain and renew itself? You're in ancient Egyptian temples now, where cats were considered so sacred that killing one meant death, and families spent fortunes mummifying their feline companions for eternal afterlife service. Around 2000 BCE, Egyptians developed elaborate cat worship centered on Bastet, the feline goddess who protected households and guided souls through death realms. Sacred cats lived in temple complexes where they received daily offerings of the finest foods, gold jewelry, and perfumed oils that surpassed the luxury enjoyed by most humans. Families who couldn't afford proper mummification for their cats faced social ostracism and were considered spiritually unworthy of divine protection in their own afterlives. Those caught harming cats faced immediate execution without trial, as injuring sacred felines was equivalent to attacking the gods themselves. The soft purring of temple cats lounging on silk cushions, the gentle scraping of embalming tools preparing feline souls for eternal journeys. Egyptian cat worship influenced burial practices throughout the Mediterranean and created the world's first animal welfare laws backed by religious authority. What creatures in our lives might deserve the reverence we usually reserve only for ourselves? Dear listeners, you're on windswept Greek mountainsides now, where Spartan elders left newborn infants exposed to elements, believing only those strong enough to survive alone deserved citizenship in their warrior society. Around 800 BCE, Spartan society practiced infant exposure as population control and genetic selection, leaving newborns on Mount Taygetus for several nights to test their survival instincts. Community elders examined infants for physical defects and signs of weakness, making life or death decisions based on their assessment of each child's potential military value. Parents who secretly rescued exposed infants faced exile from Sparta and permanent loss of citizenship rights, learning that individual parental attachment must yield to collective military needs. Spartan warriors who had survived infant exposure wore special bronze tokens throughout their lives, marking them as divinely selected for military service. The gentle crying of infants carried away by mountain winds, the soft footsteps of parents forced to abandon their children to fate's judgment. This practice created the ancient world's most feared military force while establishing precedents for selective breeding that influenced genetic theories for millennia. What tests of worthiness do we apply today that might seem equally harsh to future generations looking back at our choices? You're in Guatemalan jungle palaces now, where Mayan rulers pierced their own tongues and genitals with stingray spines, believing their royal blood could nourish the gods and maintain cosmic balance. Around 900 CE, Mayan bloodletting ceremonies required nobility to inflict deliberate wounds on themselves using obsidian blades and stingray barbs, collecting their blood on bark paper that was burned as offerings to sky deities. Royal bloodletters underwent spiritual preparation lasting months, fasting and meditating to ensure their life essence would be pure enough for divine consumption. Kings and queens who flinched during bloodletting ceremonies faced public humiliation and questioning of their divine right to rule, as courage during self-torture demonstrated spiritual worthiness. The soft hiss of blood dripping onto sacred paper that would carry prayers to celestial realms, the gentle chanting that accompanied each deliberate wound inflicted for cosmic maintenance. These blood sacrifices convinced Maya that their royal suffering directly influenced rainfall patterns, crop yields, and protection from natural disasters that threatened their civilization. What pain might we willingly endure if we truly believed our suffering could prevent others from experiencing even greater hardships? Hey friends, you're beside medieval European rivers now, where Germanic tribes threw accused criminals into water, believing that divine judgment would cause innocent people to sink and guilty ones to float. Around 500 CE, Germanic water ordeals reflected belief that natural elements served as direct conduits for divine justice, with water's acceptance or rejection of human bodies revealing supernatural verdicts about moral guilt. Accused individuals underwent 3 days of fasting and prayer before water trials, purifying themselves to receive accurate divine judgment through physical interaction with sacred elements. Those who floated were immediately executed as proven guilty, while those who sank were rescued and declared innocent by divine verification. Trial administrators who showed bias or attempted to influence ordeal outcomes faced undergoing the same trials themselves, ensuring that human judgment never corrupted divine justice systems. The gentle splash of bodies entering sacred rivers that served as divine courtrooms. The soft prayers whispered before surrendering to elemental judgment. Water ordeals influenced European legal systems for centuries and established precedents for supernatural justice that shaped medieval criminal law throughout Christendom. What would our justice system look like if we truly believed that truth could be determined by forces beyond human reasoning and bias? You're approaching Pacific Islands now, where Polynesian tapu laws made certain places, objects, and even people so sacred that touching them meant instant death from supernatural forces. Around 1200 CE, Polynesian tapu systems created elaborate networks of sacred prohibitions that regulated every aspect of island life, from fishing seasons to marriage arrangements to walking paths that could never be crossed by common people. Tapu violations were believed to bring automatic supernatural punishment without human intervention, making enforcement unnecessary since the gods themselves would strike down offenders. Individuals who broke tapu restrictions faced immediate banishment to hostile islands where they lived as outcasts until divine forgiveness restored their spiritual standing. Chiefs who declared improper tapu faced losing their divine authority and being stripped of all social rank, learning that sacred power required perfect understanding of cosmic law. The soft rustle of palm leaves marking boundaries that separated sacred from profane spaces, the gentle lapping of ocean waves against shores that were sometimes forbidden to human feet. Tapu systems maintained ecological balance throughout the Pacific, while creating social structures that prevented resource depletion and territorial conflicts between island communities. What boundaries do we need to establish today to protect the sacred spaces that ensure our survival and spiritual well-being? Dear listeners, you're in ancient North Africa now, where Carthaginian parents willingly sacrificed their own children to Moloch, believing these ultimate gifts would ensure their city's prosperity and military success. Around 400 BCE, Carthaginian Tophet ceremonies required parents to offer their firstborn children during times of crisis, believing that the most precious sacrifices would compel gods to intervene on behalf of their civilization. Children selected for sacrifice underwent months of special treatment, receiving the finest foods and education while being prepared for their sacred destiny as divine messengers. Parents who showed grief or reluctance during sacrifice ceremonies faced social condemnation and exclusion from the religious community that formed the foundation of Carthaginian identity. Priests who performed sacrifice rituals incorrectly faced replacing the children they had failed to properly consecrate, learning that sacred duties required absolute precision in their divine service. the gentle singing of children who believed they were traveling to join the gods, the soft crackling of fires that carried innocent souls to celestial realms. These child sacrifices convinced Carthaginians that their military victories and commercial success resulted directly from their willingness to offer their most beloved possessions to secure divine favor. What are we sacrificing today in the name of prosperity that future generations might judge as incomprehensibly cruel and unnecessary? You're in the palace of Knossos now, where Minoan acrobats performed impossible leaps over charging bulls, transforming deadly encounters into divine performances that connected earth to heaven. Around 1500 BCE, Minoan bull leapers underwent 7 years of training that prepared them for religious ceremonies where they somersaulted over sacred bulls during festival seasons. These athlete priests developed superhuman agility and timing, learning to read bovine behavior so precisely they could predict exactly when to vault over massive horns. Bull leapers who hesitated or showed fear during performances faced ritual purification involving 3 months of isolation in underground chambers, emerging only when they had conquered their survival instincts through meditation. The thunderous snorting of sacred bulls and the graceful silence of human bodies arcing through dangerous space, the soft landing of bare feet on marble floors, blessed by divine protection. These bull-dancing ceremonies convinced Minoans that human courage could tame natural forces and maintain harmony between civilization and wildness. What grace might we discover if we learned to dance with our fears instead of running from them? Dear listeners, you're in ancient Babylon's temple complexes now, where professional dream readers spent their lives translating the symbolic language that gods used to communicate with sleeping mortals. Around 2100 BCE, Mesopotamian dream interpreters underwent training that required them to sleep in sacred chambers where divine visions were believed to be most clear and accurate. Master interpreters maintained dream journals spanning decades, developing encyclopedic knowledge of symbolic meanings that enabled them to decode messages from various deities. Dream readers who misinterpreted royal visions faced temporary blindfolding that lasted entire lunar cycles, learning to rely on inner sight rather than physical perception while developing deeper spiritual sensitivity. The gentle rustling of reed paper recording nocturnal revelations, the soft whisper of incense smoke that carried prayers for accurate interpretation to celestial realms. These dream translations influenced major governmental decisions throughout Mesopotamia and established the foundation for psychological analysis that wouldn't be formally recognized again until modern psychology. What messages might our dreams contain if we learned to listen to them as conversations with forces beyond our conscious understanding? You're standing in Scandinavian forests now, where Norse berserkers transformed into bears and wolves through ritual fury that made them unstoppable in battle, but dangerous to their own communities. Around 900 CE, Norse berserkers underwent shamanic initiation involving months of wilderness survival with only animal companionship, learning to channel bestial consciousness during combat situations. These warrior shamans consumed hallucinogenic mushrooms and practiced self-hypnosis techniques that enabled them to access animal instincts while maintaining enough human awareness to distinguish enemies from allies. Berserkers who lost control and attacked their own warriors faced exile to remote islands where they lived alone until they mastered their transformation abilities through solitary spiritual discipline. The rhythmic chanting that preceded battle trance and the primal roaring of human throats producing animal sounds, the gentle return to normal consciousness after supernatural fury had passed. Berserker regiments enabled Viking expansion throughout Europe while creating psychological warfare tactics that terrorized enemies who faced seemingly inhuman opponents. What wild power might we access if we learned to embrace the animal aspects of ourselves instead of suppressing them? Hey friends, you're floating above underwater caves in Mexico's Yucatan now, where Maya divers descended into sacred cenotes carrying precious offerings for Chaac. the rain god who lived in aquatic underworld realms. Around 800 CE, Maya cenote divers developed underwater swimming techniques that enabled them to reach cave depths where they believed rain gods accepted offerings during drought seasons. Master divers could hold their breath for over 4 minutes while navigating flooded cave systems in complete darkness, relying on touch and spiritual guidance to find underwater altars. Divers who panicked underwater or lost their offerings to cave currents faced spending entire dry seasons performing surface water ceremonies, earning the right to attempt cenote diving again through demonstrated devotion to rain deities. The gentle echoing of prayers whispered before diving into sacred waters, the soft splash of precious jade and gold settling on underwater altars that connected surface world to divine aquatic realm. These cenote offerings convinced Maya that their underwater gifts directly influenced rainfall patterns and agricultural success throughout their civilization. What depths might we explore if we learned to trust that our most precious offerings deserve to be given to forces we cannot see or control? You're witnessing ancient Mesopotamia's holiest ceremony now, where Sumerian kings and high priestesses performed ritual marriages with fertility gods, believing their sacred union would ensure abundant harvests and cosmic harmony. Around 3000 BCE, Sumerian sacred marriage ceremonies required rulers to consummate symbolic weddings with Inanna, goddess of love and fertility, through elaborate rituals that lasted several days. Royal participants underwent purification processes involving ritual bathing, fasting, and consumption of sacred foods that prepared their bodies to channel divine energy during religious consummation. Kings who failed to perform sacred marriage duties properly faced losing their divine mandate to rule, as their inability to connect with fertility deities indicated spiritual unworthiness for governmental authority. The gentle singing of wedding hymns that blessed divine unions, the soft rustling of ceremonial robes worn for cosmic matrimony between earthly and celestial realms. These sacred marriages convinced Sumerians that their agricultural prosperity and political stability depended entirely on maintaining proper relationships between human rulers and fertility gods. What sacred partnerships might we form if we approached our most intimate relationships as ceremonies that could heal the world? Dear listeners, you're deep in Bulgarian mountain caves now, where Thracian Orphic initiates learned secret passwords and rituals that would enable their souls to navigate successfully through death realms and achieve immortality. Around 600 BCE, Thracian Orphic mystery schools taught elaborate afterlife geography that initiates memorized through years of secret study, learning the names and locations of underworld rivers, guardians, and pathways. Mystery initiates underwent ritual death experiences involving burial in earth for several hours, practicing the psychological techniques they would need when their souls separated from their physical bodies. Initiates who revealed mystery secrets to uninitiated outsiders faced expulsion from the sacred community and loss of their afterlife preparation, condemning them to wander lost in death realms without proper spiritual guidance. The whispered passwords that would unlock gates between life and death, the gentle chanting of ritual formulas that prepared souls for their greatest journey. Orphic mysteries influenced Greek philosophical schools and early Christian thought, while providing ancient peoples with detailed maps for navigating the transition from mortal existence to eternal consciousness. What preparation might we need for the transitions that await us beyond the boundaries of everything we currently understand? You're walking through ancient French oak forests now, where Gaulish druids maintained sacred groves, where the normal flow of time supposedly slowed down, enabling communication with ancestors across centuries. Around 200 BCE, Gaulish druids identified specific oak groves where they claimed time moved at different speeds, creating temporal sanctuaries where past, present, and future merged into accessible spiritual reality. Master Druids spent decades learning to recognize temporal anomalies within sacred groves, developing sensitivity to chronological shifts that enabled them to receive wisdom from ancestors and future generations. Druids who violated grove sanctity by bringing metal objects or speaking loudly faced temporary banishment from all sacred forests, learning respect for temporal mysteries through exclusion from time-altered consciousness. The gentle rustling of oak leaves that seemed to whisper across multiple centuries, the soft footsteps that moved between different temporal dimensions within the same physical space. These time groves enabled Gallic Druids to provide guidance that drew from both ancestral wisdom and prophetic glimpses of future possibilities. What wisdom might we access if we learn to step outside the relentless forward march of time that usually governs our lives? You're standing beside massive burial mounds across Asian steppes now, where Scythian nomads created elaborate gold-filled tombs designed to catapult deceased souls directly into celestial star patterns. Around 400 BCE, Scythian burial practices involved constructing enormous earthen mounds filled with gold artifacts that served as spiritual launching pads for souls traveling to join ancestors among constellations. Royal burials included hundreds of gold animal figures arranged in specific patterns that mimicked star configurations visible during winter solstices. Grave builders who misaligned burial goods or damaged golden artifacts faced having their own burial rites revoked, ensuring they would wander earthbound as spirits without proper celestial transportation. The gentle tinkling of golden animals being arranged for eternal star journeys, the soft scraping of earth being mounded over treasures that would fuel afterlife adventures. These star-bound burials convinced Scythians that proper funeral preparations could literally transform death into cosmic travel, enabling deceased souls to join eternal hunting grounds among celestial animal spirits. What vehicles are we preparing for the journeys that might await us beyond the familiar boundaries of earthly existence? Hey friends, you're descending into Nubian royal pyramids now, where curse tablets written in multiple languages promised terrible fates for anyone who disturbed the eternal rest of Kushite pharaohs. Around 300 BCE, Nubian pyramid builders installed elaborate curse systems that combined written threats in Egyptian hieroglyphs, Meroitic script, and Greek text to ensure maximum spiritual protection for royal tombs. Curse scribes underwent purification rituals lasting 40 days before writing protective spells, ensuring their spiritual purity wouldn't contaminate the magical formulas designed to guard royal afterlives. Scribes who made errors in curse tablet inscriptions faced copying the protective texts repeatedly until their accuracy satisfied tomb architects who supervised magical security systems. The gentle scraping of reed pens creating words of power designed to span multiple languages and spiritual traditions. The soft whisper of papyrus scrolls containing threats that transcended cultural boundaries. These multilingual curses demonstrated Nubian understanding that tomb protection required magical formulas powerful enough to deter grave robbers from various cultural backgrounds. What protection might our most treasured memories need that requires wisdom drawn from multiple traditions and languages we haven't learned yet? You're standing above underground churches in Ethiopia now, where medieval architects carved entire cathedrals downward into solid bedrock, creating sacred spaces that grew deeper rather than higher toward heaven. Around 1200 CE, Ethiopian church builders developed unique architectural techniques that involved carving elaborate religious complexes entirely below ground level, believing that downward construction created stronger connections to divine realms. Master stone carvers underwent spiritual training that included months of underground meditation, developing the psychological stamina necessary for working in confined subterranean spaces. Carvers who damaged church walls or created structural weaknesses faced remaining underground until they repaired their mistakes, learning precision through prolonged exposure to the dark, enclosed environment they had compromised. The gentle echoing of chisels against bedrock, creating sacred spaces through subtraction rather than addition. The soft footsteps of pilgrims descending into earth to find divine transcendence. These underground churches enabled Ethiopian Christians to worship safely during periods of religious persecution while creating architectural marvels that demonstrated faith through downward rather than upward aspiration. What sacred spaces might we create if we learned to dig deeper into the foundations of our lives instead of always reaching higher? Hey friends, if you love this series of forgotten secrets from the ancient world, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful journeys through history's hidden chambers. You're in ancient Mesopotamian homes now, where Akkadian families buried inscribed bowls beneath their thresholds, believing these ceramic traps could capture evil spirits and protect their households from supernatural harm. Around 600 CE, Akkadian demon bowl makers created protective ceramics, inscribed with Aramaic spells designed to imprison malevolent entities that threatened family safety. Master bowl inscribers underwent purification rituals lasting 7 days before touching ceramic surfaces, ensuring their spiritual cleanliness wouldn't contaminate protective magic. Bowl makers who inscribed spells incorrectly faced having their own homes protected by defective bowls, learning accuracy through personal vulnerability to the spiritual dangers their mistakes might allow. The gentle scraping of reed styluses carving protective words into soft clay, the soft whisper of incantations spoken over ceramic shields that would guard sleeping families. These demon bowls enabled Akkadian households to create spiritual security systems that functioned as supernatural home alarm systems throughout the ancient Middle East. What invisible threats might we protect against if we learn to recognize the spiritual dimensions of the spaces where we live and sleep? Dear listeners, you're floating on Pacific swells now, where Polynesian navigators created stick charts from bamboo and cowrie shells that recorded wave patterns and island locations across thousands of miles of open ocean. Around 1000 CE, Polynesian stick chart makers developed three-dimensional mapping techniques that recorded ocean swell patterns, current directions, and island positions using only natural materials available on remote atolls. Master navigators spent decades learning to translate wave interference patterns into stick and shell arrangements that could guide voyages across seemingly endless stretches of featureless water. Navigators who created inaccurate charts faced using their own flawed maps during solo voyages, learning precision through the life-threatening consequences of geographical errors in open ocean conditions. The gentle clicking of bamboo sticks being tied with coconut fiber, the soft rattling of cowrie shells marking invisible islands on three-dimensional ocean maps. These stick charts enabled Polynesian settlement of Pacific islands, separated by distances that seemed impossible to navigate without modern instruments. What invisible patterns surround us daily that might serve as maps for journeys we haven't yet learned how to take? You're descending into underground Roman temples now, where Mithraic initiates worshipped the sun god Mithras in elaborate cave ceremonies that promised spiritual rebirth through symbolic death and resurrection. Around 100 CE, Mithraic mystery cults constructed subterranean temples designed to simulate cosmic caves, where the sun god Mithras supposedly slayed the cosmic bull to create the universe. Mithraic initiates progressed through 7 grades of initiation, each requiring different ordeals, including fasting, ritual scarification, and psychological tests designed to prepare souls for solar enlightenment. Initiates who revealed mystery secrets or failed grade advancement faced expulsion from underground communities and loss of their spiritual brotherhood, condemning them to spiritual darkness without access to solar wisdom. The flickering torchlight that illuminated underground cosmic dramas, the gentle chanting of solar hymns that echoed through cave chambers designed to recreate creation mythology. These Mithraic mysteries influenced early Christian symbolism, while providing Roman soldiers with spiritual communities that offered meaning beyond military service. What hidden sources of light might we discover if we learn to seek illumination in the deepest, darkest places within ourselves? Hey friends, you're walking through ancient Indian villages now, where Jain Digambara monks renounced all possessions including clothing, believing that complete nudity demonstrated ultimate spiritual freedom from material attachment. Around 300 BCE, Jain, sky-clad monks practiced extreme non-possessiveness that required abandoning not only material goods but also clothing, shelter, and permanent residence in any location. These naked ascetics underwent gradual renunciation training that slowly reduced their possessions over years until they achieved complete material independence. Monks who accumulated possessions or showed attachment to comfort faced additional years of naked wandering, learning detachment through prolonged exposure to weather, social rejection, and physical discomfort. The soft footsteps of unshod feet walking on roads that led everywhere and nowhere, the gentle rustling of leaves that provided the only covering these holy men ever accepted. Sky-clad Jainism influenced Indian philosophical development while demonstrating how spiritual freedom might require abandoning every form of security that ordinary humans consider essential. What freedom might we discover if we learn to distinguish between what we actually need and what we merely think we cannot live without? You're wandering through Scottish Highlands now, where Pictish symbol carvers created intricate stone messages using a visual language that remains completely undeciphered despite centuries of scholarly investigation. Around 500 CE, Pictish stone carvers developed symbolic writing systems that recorded important cultural information using abstract designs, animal figures, and geometric patterns that made perfect sense to their contemporaries but remain mysterious today. Master carvers underwent apprenticeships that required memorizing hundreds of symbol combinations and their contextual meanings through oral tradition that died when Pictish culture was absorbed by expanding Scottish kingdoms. Carvers who forgot symbol meanings or created incorrect inscriptions faced recarving entire stone monuments, learning accuracy through exhausting correction of their mysterious mistakes. The rhythmic chipping of iron tools against granite surfaces, the gentle scraping of symbols emerging from stone that would outlast the civilization that created them. These undeciphered symbols represent one of archaeology's greatest puzzles, while demonstrating how easily complex communication systems can vanish when cultures disappear. What messages are we creating today that might become equally mysterious to future peoples who find our artifacts but cannot understand our intentions? You're traveling ancient trade routes now, where Sogdian merchants wrote letters in multiple languages that connected China, Persia, and the Byzantine Empire through commercial correspondence that spanned continents. Around 500 CE, Sogdian letter writers developed multilingual literacy that enabled them to conduct international business using Chinese characters, Persian script, Arabic letters, and various Central Asian alphabets within single documents. Master scribes underwent linguistic training that required fluency in dozens of languages and writing systems, developing communication abilities that made them indispensable for transcontinental commerce. Scribes who mistranslated important commercial or diplomatic correspondence faced working without payment until they mastered the languages they had misused, learning accuracy through economic consequences that could bankrupt trading partnerships. The gentle scratching of reed pens creating words in multiple scripts, the soft rustling of silk paper carrying messages across impossible distances between civilizations that had never directly communicated. These multilingual letters enabled Silk Road commerce while creating the world's first truly global communication network. What connections might we forge if we learn to communicate across the cultural and linguistic barriers that usually separate us from distant peoples? Dear listeners, you're in ancient Sudanese monasteries now, where Nubian Christian artists created religious frescoes that combined African, Byzantine, and Coptic artistic traditions in unique synthesis that existed nowhere else. Around 800 CE, Nubian fresco painters developed artistic techniques that incorporated traditional African symbolism with Christian iconography, creating religious art that spoke to both indigenous spiritual traditions and imported Christian theology. Master painters underwent religious training that included months of prayer and fasting before touching sacred walls, ensuring their spiritual purity wouldn't contaminate religious artwork intended for divine contemplation. Painters who created inappropriate religious imagery faced spending entire seasons copying correct Christian symbols repeatedly until their hands learned proper sacred artistry through exhaustive repetition. The gentle scraping of brushes applying pigments that would preserve Christian faith in African soil, the soft whisper of prayers spoken over walls that transformed monastery chambers into windows to heaven. These Christian frescoes enabled Nubian conversion while maintaining cultural identity through artistic synthesis that honored both ancestral and adopted spiritual traditions. What beauty might emerge if we learned to combine our inherited traditions with new wisdom instead of choosing between them. You're in ancient Mexico's scriptoriums now, where Aztec tlacuilos painted historical codices using hieroglyphic art that recorded everything from tribute lists to religious ceremonies in colorful pictographic manuscripts. Around 1400 CE, Aztec codex painters developed pictographic writing systems that combined realistic illustration with abstract symbols to create comprehensive records of governmental, religious, and historical information. Master tlacuilos underwent artistic training that required memorizing hundreds of symbolic conventions and their proper usage in different documentary contexts, developing visual literacy that enabled them to read and write through images. Painters who created inaccurate historical records faced having their artistic privileges revoked and being assigned to ordinary craft work until they relearned the precision required for sacred historical documentation. The gentle scraping of obsidian tools preparing bark paper surfaces, the soft brushing of mineral pigments creating visual narratives that preserved Aztec civilization in permanent artistic form. These pictographic codices enabled Aztec record-keeping while creating art forms that communicated complex information through visual beauty rather than abstract alphabetic symbols. What stories might we tell more clearly if we learned to communicate through images that speak to the heart rather than words that reach only the mind? You're standing beside ancient Irish stone pillars now, where Celtic Ogham carvers created alphabet systems based on tree names, transforming forest wisdom into written language that connected literacy with natural spirituality. Around 400 CE, Celtic Ogham carvers developed writing systems where each letter corresponded to a specific tree species, creating alphabets that embedded botanical knowledge within every written word. Master carvers underwent druidic training that required learning the spiritual significance of various trees before they could properly represent forest wisdom through carved stone inscriptions. Carvers who confused tree correspondences or carved incorrect Ogham letters faced spending seasons alone in forests, relearning plant lore through direct communion with the trees they had misrepresented in stone. The gentle scraping of iron knives carving lines and notches that represented living forests, the soft whisper of wind through trees that inspired alphabetic systems based on natural wisdom. These Ogham inscriptions enabled Celtic literacy while maintaining spiritual connections between written language and the living forests that provided both inspiration and practical knowledge. What wisdom might our writing contain if every letter we formed connected us more deeply to the natural world that sustains all human knowledge? Hey friends, you're examining ancient Persian religious texts now, where Manichaean scribes created illuminated manuscripts that illustrated the eternal cosmic battle between light and darkness through intricate artistic symbolism. Around 300 CE, Manichaean manuscript illuminators developed artistic techniques that used gold leaf and precious pigments to create religious books that literally glowed with divine light when opened in darkened chambers. Master illuminators underwent purification rituals that included dietary restrictions and meditation practices designed to align their spiritual energy with the cosmic light they depicted in sacred artwork. Illuminators who allowed darkness to contaminate their artistic work faced periods of fasting in complete darkness, learning to appreciate spiritual light through temporary deprivation of both physical illumination and food. The gentle application of gold leaf that transformed manuscript pages into portable sources of divine radiance. The soft turning of pages that revealed cosmic dramas painted in colors that seemed to contain their own inner light. These illuminated manuscripts enabled Manichaean communities to carry portable pieces of cosmic truth while creating art that demonstrated their religious beliefs through visual beauty that transcended ordinary human craftsmanship. What light might we create in our daily work if we approached every task as an opportunity to add more illumination to a world that often feels too dark? You're in ancient Mesopotamian ruins now, where Sumerian lamentation singers performed elaborate funeral ceremonies for destroyed cities, believing their songs could resurrect entire civilizations from rubble and ash. Around 2000 BCE, Sumerian lamentation singers developed elaborate musical rituals designed to mourn the destruction of cities while magically enabling their spiritual and physical restoration. Master singers underwent training that required memorizing hundreds of complex laments, each specifically composed for different types of urban destruction, from enemy conquest to natural disasters. Singers who performed lamentations incorrectly or showed insufficient grief faced having their own homes demolished, learning proper mourning through personal experience of architectural loss and reconstruction. The haunting melodies that rose from devastated streets like prayers made audible, the gentle weeping that transformed individual sorrow into collective healing ceremony. These lamentation performances convinced Sumerians that proper mourning could literally reverse catastrophe, enabling destroyed communities to rebuild with divine assistance, attracted by beautiful expressions of genuine grief. What losses in our own lives might be transformed into renewal if we learned to mourn them with the same beauty and intention? Dear listeners, you're among ancient Bulgarian mountain tribes now, where Thracian shamans tattooed prophetic visions directly onto their skin, creating permanent records of future events that covered their entire bodies. Around 500 BCE, Thracian tattoo prophets developed divination practices that involved translating spiritual visions into elaborate body artwork that served as permanent prophetic libraries accessible to their communities. Master tattoo shamans underwent vision quests that required fasting in mountain caves until they received divine revelations, then enduring painful tattooing sessions that could last weeks to properly record their supernatural insights. Shamans who received false visions or tattooed incorrect prophecies faced having their failed predictions surgically removed, learning spiritual accuracy through physical correction of their prophetic mistakes. The gentle tapping of bone needles creating permanent records of temporary visions, the soft chanting that accompanied each prophetic image being inscribed into living flesh. These tattooed prophecies enabled Thracian communities to prepare for future challenges while creating shamans whose bodies became walking libraries of divine wisdom. What wisdom might we carry more permanently if we were willing to make our most important insights as permanent as the bodies that house them? You're in ancient Mexican jungles now, where Olmec artists carved massive stone heads weighing several tons each, believing these colossal portraits contained the actual spirits of deceased rulers and could govern communities even after death. Around 1200 BCE, Olmec head sculptors developed techniques for carving enormous basalt portraits that required moving massive stones across difficult terrain using only rope, wooden rollers, and human labor. Master sculptors underwent spiritual training that prepared them to handle the psychological responsibility of trapping royal souls within stone features that would need to remain recognizable for centuries. Sculptors who failed to capture their subjects' spiritual essence accurately faced destroying their colossal work and beginning again, learning that artistic mistakes with materials this massive could waste years of community effort. The rhythmic pounding of stone hammers shaping features that would outlast empires. The gentle scraping of finishing tools, polishing surfaces that would preserve individual personality in eternal stone form. These colossal heads enabled Olmec rulers to maintain governmental authority after death while demonstrating how artistic skill could transform temporary human leadership into permanent spiritual guidance. What aspects of our leadership and influence might deserve to be preserved in forms solid enough to guide future generations long after our voices have fallen silent? Hey friends, you're in ancient Sumerian temples now, where priestesses dedicated to Ninkasi, goddess of beer, performed elaborate wedding ceremonies with barley grain, believing these sacred marriages enabled divine brewing that could sustain entire civilizations. Around 3500 BCE, Mesopotamian beer priestesses developed brewing techniques that incorporated religious ceremonies treating fermentation as sacred marriage between human devotion and divine grain spirits. Master brewers underwent purification rituals lasting 40 days before touching brewing equipment, ensuring their spiritual cleanliness wouldn't contaminate the sacred relationship between goddess and grain. Priestesses who allowed beer to spoil or performed brewing ceremonies incorrectly faced consuming only bread and water for entire seasons, learning proper reverence for fermentation through temporary deprivation of the beverages they were meant to create. The gentle bubbling of fermentation vessels blessed by wedding songs, the soft stirring of grain and water united through ceremonies that transformed simple ingredients into divine sustenance. These sacred brewing marriages enabled Sumerian civilization to develop agriculture and urban life while creating religious practices that treated food production as ongoing conversation with divine forces. What daily activities in our lives might be transformed into sacred partnerships if we approached them as collaborations with forces larger than ourselves? You're in frozen Arctic landscapes now, where Inuit shamans performed soul flight journeys that enabled their spirits to travel to distant hunting grounds, underwater kingdoms, and celestial realms, while their bodies remained motionless in icebound communities. Around 1000 CE, Inuit shamans developed trance techniques that supposedly enabled their souls to separate from physical bodies and travel across vast distances to gather information about weather, animal movements, and spiritual conditions affecting their communities. Master shamans underwent training that included surviving alone on sea ice for weeks, learning to separate consciousness from physical survival needs through extreme exposure to Arctic conditions. Shamans who failed to return from soul flights or brought back inaccurate spiritual intelligence faced spending seasons in isolation, relearning proper trance techniques through solitary practice in frozen wilderness conditions. The rhythmic drumming that guided spirit travel across impossible distances. The gentle breathing that maintained physical life while consciousness explored territories beyond ordinary human reach. These soul flight journeys enabled Inuit communities to survive in Earth's most challenging environments, while developing spiritual technologies that transcended physical limitations of geography and climate. What territories of consciousness might we explore if we learn to trust that our awareness can travel beyond the boundaries that usually confine our attention? Dear listeners, you're atop Guatemalan pyramids now, where Maya astronomers created mathematical systems so precise they could predict lunar eclipses centuries in advance, treating celestial calculations as conversations with time itself. Around 600 CE, Maya eclipse astronomers developed calendrical mathematics that enabled accurate prediction of lunar and solar eclipses through complex calculations that required understanding multiple interlocking time cycles spanning thousands of years. Master astronomers underwent training that combined mathematical education with spiritual instruction, learning to see numerical relationships as expressions of cosmic consciousness rather than merely abstract calculations. Astronomers who miscalculated eclipse predictions faced copying astronomical tables repeatedly until their mathematical accuracy satisfied temple authorities responsible for maintaining civilization's temporal relationship with celestial events. The soft scratching of obsidian styluses creating numbers that captured cosmic rhythms. The gentle chanting of mathematical formulas that connected earthly consciousness with universal time patterns. These eclipse predictions enabled Maya civilization to maintain agricultural and ceremonial schedules while demonstrating how mathematical precision could serve as technology for understanding cosmic consciousness. What patterns in time might we recognize if we learned to see mathematics as a language for conversing with the intelligence that organizes all temporal experience? You're in dark northern European forests now, where Germanic tribes cast carved wooden lots to make important decisions, believing these runic chips contained divine wisdom that could guide everything from battle strategies to marriage choices. Around 100 CE, Germanic rune masters developed divination systems using wooden chips carved with sacred symbols that supposedly channeled divine guidance for tribal decision-making processes. Master rune casters underwent training that required memorizing the spiritual significance of various symbol combinations and learning to interpret divine messages through careful observation of how wooden lots fell on sacred ground. Runecasters who misinterpreted divine guidance during important tribal consultations faced temporary banishment from their communities, learning proper spiritual sensitivity through isolation from the social groups they had failed to serve accurately. The gentle rattling of wooden chips containing ancient wisdom, the soft whisper of voices consulting divine will through careful interpretation of sacred symbol patterns. These runic divinations influenced major Germanic tribal migrations and political alliances, while creating decision-making systems that trusted supernatural wisdom more than human judgment alone. What guidance might we receive if we learned to consult sources of wisdom beyond our individual understanding when facing our most important choices? You're diving into Mediterranean waters now, where Phoenician shell collectors harvested tiny sea snails to create Tyrian purple dye so valuable it became currency more precious than gold, enabling trade empires built on color itself. Around 1000 BCE, Phoenician murex masters developed dye extraction techniques that required collecting thousands of spiny sea snails to produce small amounts of purple dye that would become the ancient world's most valuable commodity. Master dyers underwent training that included learning to dive to dangerous depths while avoiding predatory sea creatures that made their homes in the rocky crevices where murex shells clustered. Dyers who damaged valuable shell harvests or contaminated dye production faced working without payment until they replaced their losses, learning precision through economic consequences that could bankrupt entire family businesses. The gentle clicking of shells being carefully processed into liquid treasure, the soft bubbling of dye vats that transformed sea creatures into colors worthy of emperors and gods. These purple dyes enabled Phoenician civilization to dominate Mediterranean trade while creating luxury markets that connected distant cultures through shared appreciation of impossible beauty. What treasures might we create from the humblest materials if we learned to see potential value hidden in things others consider worthless? Hey friends, you're on windswept Tibetan plateaus now, where Buddhist sky burial masters performed elaborate death ceremonies that offered human corpses to vultures, transforming bodily death into acts of compassion that nourished other living beings. Around 1200 CE, Tibetan sky burial practitioners developed death rituals that treated human corpses as final gifts to other creatures, believing this practice demonstrated ultimate generosity while enabling consciousness to separate completely from physical attachment. Master burial attendants underwent training that required overcoming natural revulsion toward death and dismemberment while maintaining compassionate intention throughout ceremonies that could last entire days. Burial masters who showed fear or disgust during death ceremonies faced spending months in meditation retreats, learning to accept mortality through prolonged contemplation of impermanence and bodily dissolution. The gentle flapping of vulture wings gathering to receive generous offerings, the soft chanting of prayers that blessed each act of bodily generosity as expression of ultimate compassion. These sky burial ceremonies enabled Tibetan Buddhist communities to practice non-attachment while creating death rituals that transformed individual mortality into nourishment for other forms of life. What final gifts might our own physical existence become if we learned to see death as our last opportunity to practice ultimate generosity? You're in ancient Sudanese workshops now, where Nubian artisans developed techniques for melting desert sand into glass beads so beautiful they became international currency, transforming the simplest earth materials into treasures that connected Africa with distant civilizations. Around 800 CE, Nubian glassmakers developed furnace technologies that enabled melting Saharan sand into colorful beads that became essential trade goods throughout medieval Africa and the Middle East. Master bead makers underwent training that required learning to judge furnace temperatures through color observation and developing the lung capacity necessary for glass blowing in extreme desert heat conditions. Artisans who created flawed or irregular beads faced melting down their mistakes and beginning again, learning precision through wasteful repetition that taught them to value perfection in materials as precious as their time and fuel. The gentle roar of furnaces hot enough to liquefy sand into flowing glass, the soft tinkling of cooling beads that transformed worthless desert materials into portable wealth that could cross continents. These glass beads enabled Nubian kingdoms to participate in international trade while demonstrating how artistic skill could transform the most abundant natural materials into objects valuable enough to purchase luxuries from distant lands. What ordinary materials around us might contain hidden potential for transformation into beauty that could connect us with people and places we've never imagined reaching? Hey friends, if you love this series of forgotten secrets from the ancient world, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful journeys through history's hidden chambers. You're standing on ancient Anatolian mountaintops now, where Hittite weather shamans claimed they could summon thunderstorms and redirect lightning strikes through elaborate rituals that transformed meteorology into divine collaboration. Around 1400 BCE, Hittite storm workers developed atmospheric magic that supposedly enabled them to influence weather patterns through careful observation of cloud formations combined with ritual practices designed to communicate with Teshub, god of storms and lightning. Master weather workers underwent training that required spending seasons alone on exposed mountain peaks during severe weather, learning to predict and allegedly influence atmospheric conditions through direct communion with storm forces. Weather workers who failed to deliver promised rain or whose storm-calling rituals brought destructive weather faced spending years in underground chambers, learning humility through separation from the sky forces they claimed to control. The rumbling of thunder that seemed to respond to human voices raised in prayer, the gentle patter of rain that followed elaborate ceremonies designed to negotiate with atmospheric spirits. These weather-working rituals convinced Hittites that human beings could serve as intermediaries between earthly agricultural needs and celestial water sources. What conversations might we have with natural forces if we learned to approach weather as a partner rather than something to simply endure or hide from? Dear listeners, you're walking through Bronze Age Sardinia now, where ancient builders constructed over 7,000 mysterious stone towers with acoustic properties that could amplify whispers and carry conversations across miles of Mediterranean landscape. Around 1500 BCE, Sardinian Nurag builders developed architectural techniques that incorporated sophisticated understanding of sound physics, creating towers that served as communication networks, enabling island-wide coordination without any mechanical technology. Master builders underwent acoustic training that required developing perfect pitch and learning to recognize how different stone arrangements affected sound propagation across various terrain types. Builders who miscalculated acoustic angles during tower construction faced dismantling their structures stone by stone and rebuilding until sound properties met the precise specifications required for long-distance communication systems. The gentle echoing of voices carried through stone chambers designed with mathematical precision, the soft whisper of conversations traveling impossible distances through carefully calculated acoustic engineering. These Nurag towers enabled Bronze Age Sardinians to coordinate complex activities across their island while creating architectural marvels that demonstrated how sound could be shaped and directed through intelligent stone arrangement. What messages might we send across great distances if we learned to build with the same understanding of how space can carry our voices to distant ears? You're riding across endless Asian steppes now, where Scythian felt makers created textiles so dense they could stop arrows while believing certain felt pieces contained trapped animal souls that provided supernatural protection. Around 600 BCE, Scythian felt shamans developed textile techniques that combined practical armor creation with spiritual practices involving the capture of animal spirits within compressed wool fibers. Master felt workers underwent shamanic initiation that required vision quests with various animal species, learning to recognize and respectfully capture the spiritual essence of creatures whose wool they would transform into protective textiles. Felt workers who created textiles without proper spiritual preparation faced wearing their inadequate products during dangerous raids, learning through personal vulnerability the importance of combining technical skill with spiritual sensitivity. The rhythmic trampling of wet wool being compressed into protective fabric that would preserve both body and soul, the soft humming of shamanic songs that blessed each stage of textile transformation. These spirit-infused felt pieces enabled Scythian warriors to carry portable animal protection while maintaining the mobility essential for nomadic lifestyle across vast grassland territories. What protection might we weave into the everyday objects we create if we learn to work with the spirits of the materials rather than simply manipulating them? Hey friends, you're floating on Pacific swells now, where Polynesian navigators wore elaborate tattoos that served as permanent charts for reading ocean currents, star positions, and island locations across thousands of miles of open water. Around 800 CE, Polynesian tattoo navigators incorporated geographical information into their body art, creating living maps that recorded ocean knowledge in permanent form that could never be lost or stolen during long voyages. Master tattoo navigators underwent training that combined geographical education with spiritual preparation, learning to see their bodies as sacred repositories for oceanic wisdom accumulated over generations of navigation experience. Navigators who received incorrect geographical tattoos faced the painful process of tattoo correction through multiple sessions, ensuring that navigational information permanently marked on their bodies would be accurate enough to guide future voyages. The gentle tapping of traditional tattoo combs creating permanent navigation aids that connected human flesh with oceanic geography, the soft chanting of geographical songs that accompanied each design representing distant islands and current patterns. These navigational tattoos enabled Polynesian expansion across the Pacific while creating human libraries of oceanic knowledge that survived in living form even when traditional charts were lost. What essential knowledge might we carry permanently if we were willing to make our most important information as permanent as our own bodies? You're climbing ancient Babylonian ziggurats now, where Mesopotamian engineers created elaborate pulley systems that lifted priests to temple heights, transforming vertical transportation into ritual ascension toward divine realms. Around 2200 BCE, Mesopotamian ziggurat builders developed mechanical elevation systems using rope, wooden pulleys, and counterweights that enabled priests to ascend temple towers while maintaining ritual purity required for celestial communication. Master elevator operators underwent training that combined mechanical engineering with religious instruction, learning to see their lifting systems as sacred technology that enabled human consciousness to approach divine altitude. Operators who caused mechanical failures during priestly ascension ceremonies faced spending months climbing ziggurats on foot while carrying heavy building materials, learning proper reverence for elevation technology through exhausting manual labor. The gentle creaking of rope and wood carrying human prayers toward sky realms, the soft chanting of elevation hymns that blessed each stage of mechanical ascension from earthly concerns to celestial consciousness. These ziggurat elevators enabled Mesopotamian priests to conduct sky worship while creating engineering solutions that treated vertical movement as spiritual transformation rather than merely mechanical convenience. What heights might we reach if we approached our upward movement as sacred journey rather than simple transportation from one level to another? Dear listeners, you're in Scandinavian forge chambers now, where Viking swordsmiths carved runic spells directly into blade metal, believing these inscriptions could animate weapons with supernatural intelligence and fighting ability. Around 900 CE, Viking runic smiths developed metallurgical techniques that incorporated shamanic practices, treating sword forging as spiritual collaboration between human craftsmanship and divine metal consciousness. Master sword shamans underwent initiation that required vision quests with iron ore and fire spirits, learning to recognize the spiritual qualities of different metals and the runic formulas that would awaken weapon consciousness. Smiths who forged weapons without proper spiritual preparation faced having their inadequate swords shatter during their first battles, learning through dangerous failure the importance of combining technical skill with spiritual sensitivity. The rhythmic hammering that shaped metal while simultaneously invoking runic power, the gentle hissing of hot steel cooling into permanent form that would carry both cutting-edge and magical consciousness. These runic weapons enabled Viking warriors to carry supernatural allies into battle, while creating armaments that were believed to possess their own intelligence and fighting will. What tools in our lives might serve us better if we approached their creation as partnership with the intelligence hidden within raw materials? You're standing above underground Ethiopian churches now, where medieval architects carved entire cathedrals downward into solid bedrock, creating sacred spaces that grew deeper rather than taller toward divine connection. Around 1200 CE, Ethiopian church builders developed excavation techniques that enabled carving elaborate religious complexes entirely below ground level, believing that downward construction created stronger connections between human worship and divine presence dwelling within earth. Master stone carvers underwent spiritual training that included extended underground meditation, developing the psychological stamina necessary for working in confined subterranean spaces while maintaining religious devotion. Carvers who damaged church walls or created structural problems faced remaining underground until they corrected their mistakes, learning precision through prolonged exposure to the dark enclosed environment they had compromised through careless work. The gentle echo of chisels against bedrock, creating sacred space through subtraction rather than addition, the soft footsteps of pilgrims descending into earth to find spiritual elevation. These underground churches enabled Ethiopian Christians to worship safely during periods of religious conflict, while creating architectural demonstrations of faith that reach toward heaven through deep earthward excavation. What sacred spaces might we create by digging deeper into the foundations of our lives, rather than always building higher structures? You're in ancient Guatemalan dental workshops now, where Maya craftsmen replaced healthy teeth with precisely carved jade pieces, transforming human smiles into displays of spiritual wealth and divine favor. Around 700 CE, Maya dental artists developed surgical techniques that enabled removing perfectly healthy teeth and replacing them with carved gemstone alternatives that served as permanent spiritual status symbols. Master dental sculptors underwent training that combined surgical skill with stone carving artistry, learning to create jade teeth that fit individual mouth shapes while displaying appropriate spiritual symbolism. Patients who couldn't endure jade tooth installation procedures faced living with gaps in their smiles, marking them as spiritually or physically inadequate for positions requiring divine favor demonstration. The gentle drilling of jade pieces shaped to fit individual dental architecture, the soft prayers that blessed each surgical procedure designed to enhance spiritual rather than merely physical appearance. These jade teeth enabled wealthy Maya to display their divine connection permanently, while creating smiles that literally gleamed with precious stone beauty, blessed by spiritual significance. What permanent changes might we make to ourselves if we believed our physical appearance could serve as constant reminder of our most important spiritual values? Hey friends, you're in prehistoric tundra landscapes now, where Paleolithic hunters constructed elaborate dwellings using mammoth bones and tusks, transforming extinct giant remains into shelters that could house entire communities. Around 15,000 BCE, Siberian mammoth bone builders developed construction techniques that utilized skeletal remains of extinct megafauna to create permanent shelters capable of withstanding extreme Arctic conditions. Master bone architects underwent training that required learning to identify and properly arrange different mammoth bone types, developing structural engineering knowledge through direct handling of materials that weighed hundreds of pounds each. Builders who constructed unstable bone shelters faced living in their inadequate dwellings during harsh winter seasons, learning structural principles through personal exposure to the consequences of poor architectural planning. The gentle creaking of ancient bones bearing weight they were never designed to carry, the soft scraping of massive tusks being positioned to create doorways and support beams for human habitation. These mammoth bone dwellings enabled Ice Age communities to create permanent settlements while demonstrating how human ingenuity could transform the remains of extinct giants into foundations for ongoing civilization. What foundations for our future might we build from the remains of things that no longer exist but still contain structural wisdom? You're in ancient Mesopotamian administrative centers now, where Akkadian artisans carved complete mythological stories into tiny stone cylinders that served as both identification documents and portable art galleries when rolled across wet clay. Around 2300 BCE, Akkadian seal carvers developed narrative compression techniques that enabled telling complex stories through miniature relief sculptures carved into cylindrical stones smaller than human thumbs. Master seal artists underwent training that required learning to translate epic narratives into visual sequences that remained legible when rolled across clay surfaces, combining storytelling ability with microscopic sculptural precision. Carvers who created seals with unclear or incomplete narratives faced recarving their work repeatedly until every story element was perfectly visible in clay impressions, learning narrative clarity through exhaustive attention to miniature detail. The delicate tapping of bronze tools, creating entire worlds of mythology within spaces smaller than coins. The soft rolling of finished seals across administrative documents that brought ancient stories to life through bureaucratic procedures. These cylinder seal stories enabled Akkadian culture to embed mythological education within everyday administrative activities while creating art forms that combined practical identification with spiritual storytelling. What stories might we tell more effectively if we learned to compress our most important narratives into forms small enough to carry everywhere, yet complete enough to contain entire worlds of meaning? You're standing beside ancient Mesopotamian floodplains now, where Sumerian memory keepers maintained oral records of great floods spanning thousands of years, treating disaster preservation as sacred duty that could protect future generations. Around 3200 BCE, Sumerian flood chroniclers developed memorization techniques that enabled them to preserve detailed accounts of catastrophic flooding events, including water levels, damage patterns, and survival strategies that had proven effective during previous disasters. Master memory keepers underwent training that required learning to recite flood histories spanning multiple centuries while maintaining perfect accuracy about seasonal timing, geographical details, and community responses. Memory keepers who forgot crucial flood details or provided inaccurate survival information faced spending seasons living in flood-prone areas during high water periods, learning disaster reality through direct exposure to the dangers their memories were meant to help others avoid. The gentle lapping of water against ancient levees that had been built according to flood memory wisdom, the soft recitation of survival stories that connected present communities with ancestral disaster experience. These flood memories enabled Sumerian civilization to develop agricultural and urban planning strategies that could withstand periodic catastrophic flooding that threatened river valley communities. What disasters from our past might we need to remember more carefully to protect future generations from repeating our most dangerous mistakes? Dear listeners, you're deep in ancient Gaulish oak forests now, where Celtic druids harvested mistletoe using only golden sickles, believing this parasitic plant contained divine power that required the most precious metal for proper collection. Around 50 BCE, Celtic mistletoe druids developed botanical collection rituals that treated certain plants as so sacred they could only be touched by gold implements blessed through elaborate purification ceremonies. Master druids underwent training that combined botanical knowledge with metallurgical skill, learning to forge and maintain golden sickles while memorizing the spiritual properties of various parasitic and epiphytic plants. Druids who used ordinary metal tools for mistletoe collection faced temporary banishment from sacred groves, learning proper reverence for divine plants through exclusion from the forest communities that formed the center of their spiritual identity. The gentle scraping of golden metal against oak bark as sacred parasites were carefully removed, the soft whisper of prayers that blessed each mistletoe cutting destined for healing ceremonies and protection rituals. These golden harvest ceremonies convinced Celts that some plants contained such concentrated divine energy that they required the most precious materials for proper collection and spiritual handling. What growing things in our world might deserve to be approached with the same reverence we usually reserve for our most precious possessions? You're in ancient Cretan palace chambers now, where Minoan priestesses performed ritual dances while handling live snakes, believing these serpents could transmit underground wisdom from earth goddesses to human consciousness. Around 1600 BCE, Minoan snake priestesses developed trance techniques that supposedly enabled them to communicate directly with chthonic deities through careful handling of various serpent species during religious ceremonies. Master priestesses underwent training that included gradual exposure to snake venom, building immunity while learning to interpret serpentine behavior as divine communication from underground goddesses. Priestesses who showed fear during snake-handling rituals faced periods of isolation in underground chambers with harmless serpents, learning to move with serpentine grace through prolonged exposure to the creatures they needed to understand. The soft hissing of sacred snakes coiling around human arms that had learned to move with reptilian rhythm, the gentle swaying of dancers whose movements synchronized with serpentine consciousness rather than human music. These snake ceremonies convinced Minoans that human consciousness could access earth wisdom through careful communion with creatures that lived closest to underground divine realms. What ancient wisdom might we receive if we learned to communicate with the creatures that inhabit territories we fear to explore? Hey friends, you're standing at the southern tip of South America now, where Patagonian shamans developed techniques for reading messages in wind patterns, treating atmospheric movement as divine communication that could predict weather and guide hunting decisions. Around 1200 CE, Patagonian wind shamans created interpretation systems that enabled them to predict weather changes, animal migrations, and seasonal timing through careful observation of wind direction, pressure changes, and atmospheric disturbances. Master wind readers underwent training that required spending seasons alone on exposed plains during severe weather, developing sensitivity to atmospheric conditions that ordinary humans couldn't detect. Shamans who misread wind signs and provided inaccurate predictions faced being staked to open ground during major storms, learning atmospheric sensitivity through forced exposure to the elemental forces they claimed to understand. The haunting whistle of Patagonian winds carrying information across endless grasslands, the gentle rustling of shaman clothing responding to atmospheric messages invisible to untrained senses. These wind-reading abilities enabled Patagonian peoples to survive in some of Earth's most challenging weather conditions while developing spiritual practices that treated atmosphere as intelligent communication medium. What messages might the air around us carry if we learn to listen to the subtle conversations happening in every breeze that touches our skin? You're walking through ancient Assyrian libraries now, where Mesopotamian librarians developed the world's first systematic cataloging methods, organizing thousands of cuneiform tablets through classification systems that enabled retrieval of specific information from vast collections. Around 700 BCE, Mesopotamian library catalogers created organizational techniques that required memorizing the contents and locations of tens of thousands of clay tablets while maintaining classification systems that enabled scholars to locate specific information within enormous archives. Master librarians underwent training that combined reading proficiency in multiple languages with mathematical skills necessary for creating and maintaining numerical cataloging systems. Librarians who misplaced important tablets or created inaccurate catalog entries faced recopying entire sections of damaged or lost texts from memory, learning information precision through exhausting restoration of their organizational mistakes. The gentle scraping of styluses, creating catalog entries that would preserve knowledge across centuries. The soft whisper of voices consulting classification systems that made vast libraries accessible to human memory and research needs. These cataloging innovations enabled Mesopotamian civilizations to accumulate and organize knowledge on scales that wouldn't be matched again until modern libraries developed similar systematic approaches to information management. What knowledge might we preserve more effectively if we approached information organization as sacred responsibility rather than mere technical convenience? Dear listeners, you're kneeling in traditional Japanese tea houses now, where tea ceremony masters transformed simple beverage preparation into elaborate spiritual practices that could induce enlightenment through perfect attention to mundane actions. Around 1200 CE, Japanese tea masters developed ceremonial techniques that treated beverage preparation as meditation practice, believing that perfect attention to simple actions could produce spiritual awakening equal to years of traditional religious study. Master tea practitioners underwent training that required learning hundreds of precise movements while maintaining meditative awareness throughout ceremonies that could last several hours. Students who performed tea ceremonies without proper mindfulness or made errors in traditional movement sequences faced repeating their training from the beginning, learning that spiritual development required absolute precision in the smallest details of daily activity. The gentle whisper of hot water being poured with mathematical precision, the soft scraping of tea bowls being cleaned according to ritual patterns that had been refined over centuries of contemplative practice. These tea ceremonies convinced Japanese practitioners that enlightenment could be achieved through complete dedication to perfect performance of ordinary activities rather than extraordinary spiritual exercises. What daily actions might become doorways to transcendence if we approach them with the same complete attention we usually reserve for emergencies? You're traveling across frozen Arctic landscapes now, where Sami herders developed lifestyles completely synchronized with reindeer migration patterns, treating animal movement as sacred calendar that determined every aspect of human activity. Around 800 CE, Sami reindeer followers created nomadic systems that required human communities to move in perfect synchronization with animal herds, abandoning fixed human settlements in favor of lifestyle completely adapted to reindeer seasonal needs. Master herders underwent training that included learning to interpret subtle reindeer behavior patterns while developing the physical endurance necessary for following herds across hundreds of miles of challenging Arctic terrain. Herders who failed to maintain proper synchronization with reindeer movements faced separation from both animals and human community, learning survival skills through isolation that taught them proper respect for animal wisdom. The gentle jingling of reindeer harnesses marking the rhythm of ancient migrations, the soft crunching of snow beneath feet that followed paths determined by animal instinct rather than human planning. These reindeer partnerships enabled Sami communities to thrive in Arctic conditions while developing cultural systems that prioritized animal wisdom over human convenience. What natural rhythms might we need to follow more closely instead of expecting the living world to adapt to our artificial schedules? You're in ancient Italian temples now, where Etruscan diviners polished bronze mirrors to perfect reflective surfaces, believing these metal mirrors could reveal future events through careful interpretation of reflected images and light patterns. Around 500 BCE, Etruscan mirror diviners developed scrying techniques that used highly polished bronze surfaces as windows into future possibilities, combining metallurgical skill with spiritual vision to create divination tools that required both technical and psychic abilities. Master mirror readers underwent training that included learning advanced bronze polishing methods while developing the visual sensitivity necessary for interpreting subtle variations in reflected light and shadow. Diviners who created mirrors with inadequate reflective quality or misinterpreted mirror visions faced destroying their flawed divination tools and beginning again, learning that spiritual accuracy required perfect technical preparation. The gentle scraping of abrasive materials, creating mirror surfaces smooth enough to hold divine visions. The soft whisper of breath that cleared bronze mirrors before each consultation with future possibilities. These bronze mirror divinations influenced important Etruscan political and military decisions while demonstrating how technical craftsmanship could serve as foundation for spiritual practices requiring supernatural perception. What reflections might we see in ordinary surfaces if we learn to look with the same intensity we bring to our most important questions about the future? Hey friends, you're standing on Pacific beaches now, where Polynesian navigators used elaborate kites to test wind patterns and atmospheric conditions, treating aerial flight as reconnaissance technology for ocean voyaging decisions. Around 1000 CE, Polynesian kite navigators developed atmospheric testing techniques that used various kite designs to gather information about wind patterns, weather changes, and atmospheric conditions that would affect long-distance ocean voyages. Master kite makers underwent training that combined aerodynamic knowledge with meteorological understanding, learning to create kites whose flight patterns could provide accurate information about atmospheric conditions across large geographical areas. Navigators who built inadequate kites or misinterpreted aerial information faced using their flawed data during actual ocean voyages. learning accuracy through the potentially dangerous consequences of atmospheric misjudgment during Pacific crossings. The gentle tugging of kite strings connecting human hands with aerial intelligence gathering systems, the soft rustling of kite materials designed to translate atmospheric information into human-readable flight patterns. These kite reconnaissance techniques enabled Polynesian navigation across vast Pacific distances, while demonstrating how aerial technology could serve oceanic exploration needs. What information might we gather from the sky if we learned to use simple tools that could translate atmospheric conditions into guidance for our earthly journeys? You're lying in ancient temple sleeping chambers now, where Mesopotamian patients practiced therapeutic dreaming, believing that sleeping in sacred spaces could enable healing through direct divine intervention during dream states. Around 2500 BCE, Mesopotamian dream healers created temple sleeping practices that treated therapeutic dreams as medical technology, requiring patients to undergo purification rituals before sleeping in sacred chambers where healing gods supposedly provided medical treatment through nocturnal visions. Master dream interpreters underwent training that combined medical knowledge with spiritual counseling, learning to guide patients through dream preparation while interpreting therapeutic visions that occurred during temple sleep sessions. Patients who failed to receive healing dreams or experienced nightmares instead of therapeutic visions faced extended stays in temple sleeping chambers, learning proper spiritual preparation through repeated attempts at divine dream communication. The gentle breathing of sacred sleepers whose dreams connected human illness with divine healing power. The soft rustle of temple linens blessed for therapeutic rather than ordinary rest. These therapeutic dreaming practices convinced Mesopotamians that proper sleep in sacred locations could provide medical treatment equal to conventional healing methods while creating temple institutions that combined hospitality with spiritual medicine. What healing might we receive if we approached sleep as sacred opportunity for restoration, rather than merely unconscious downtime between productive activities? Hey friends, if you love this series of forgotten secrets from the ancient world, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful journeys through history's hidden chambers. You're standing atop ancient Anatolian mountains now, where Hittite storm readers deciphered weather patterns through basalt stones that supposedly hummed with approaching thunder. Around 1650 BCE in present-day Turkey, Hittite weather prophets developed meteorological divination using specific volcanic stones that changed temperature before major storms. These storm oracles trained for 12 years to recognize the subtle vibrations and temperature shifts that preceded weather changes by days or weeks. Or apprentices who misread stone warnings and failed to prepare communities for severe weather faced spending entire rainy seasons stationed on exposed mountain peaks, learning atmospheric sensitivity through constant exposure to the elements. The gentle humming of basalt stones resonating with distant electrical disturbances, the soft whisper of wind carrying information about approaching pressure systems. Hittite weather prediction enabled agricultural planning and military campaigns that gave their empire significant strategic advantages over neighboring civilizations. What subtle signals from the natural world do we ignore that might contain wisdom about changes heading our way? Dear listeners, you're high in the Wudang Mountains now, where Taoist masters claimed to survive for months without food, sustaining themselves entirely through controlled breathing and morning mist. Since 400 CE, Taoist breath masters practiced techniques that supposedly enabled survival without solid food for extended periods. These air-eating hermits underwent gradual fasting programs that slowly reduced their dietary needs over decades until they consumed only water, then only morning dew. Students who broke their fasting discipline by eating solid foods faced restarting their training completely, beginning again with normal diets and working toward aerial sustenance over many years. The rhythmic breathing that seemed to draw nourishment directly from mountain air, the gentle collection of dewdrops that provided the only liquid sustenance. These practices influenced Chinese medicine and meditation techniques that emphasized breath control as the foundation of spiritual and physical health. What nourishment might we discover in the simple act of breathing if we paid attention to the life force flowing through every breath? You're walking among ancient Sardinian towers now, where Bronze Age builders created stone structures with acoustic properties that could carry whispered conversations across miles of Mediterranean landscape. Between 1800 to 500 BCE, Nuragic Sardinians constructed over 7,000 stone towers with precisely calculated acoustic chambers that amplified and directed sound waves across vast distances. Master builders underwent training that required developing perfect pitch and understanding of sound physics through purely empirical observation. Apprentices who miscalculated acoustic angles during tower construction faced dismantling their work stone by stone and rebuilding until the sound properties were perfect, learning precision through repetitive correction. The gentle echoing of voices bouncing through carefully crafted stone chambers. The soft whisper of conversations traveling impossible distances through Mediterranean air. These communication towers enabled coordination of island-wide activities and early warning systems for approaching ships or weather. What conversations might we have across great distances if we learned to build bridges with our voices instead of our technology? Hey friends, you're wandering through Scottish Highlands now, where Pictish stone carvers created symbols so mysterious that their meaning disappeared completely when their civilization ended. Between 300 and 800 CE, Pictish symbol masters carved intricate designs into standing stones, using a symbolic language that has never been successfully deciphered. These stone scribes underwent training that required memorizing hundreds of symbol combinations and their contextual meanings through oral tradition alone. Carvers who forgot symbol meanings or carved incorrectly faced having their carving tools confiscated and being forced to gather replacement stones from distant quarries using only rope and wooden rollers. The rhythmic chipping of iron tools against hard granite, the gentle scraping of symbols emerging from ancient stone surfaces. Pictish symbol stones served as territorial markers, genealogical records, and religious monuments, creating a written landscape that spoke to those who understood its vanished language. What messages are we leaving in stone that future civilizations might puzzle over long after our words have been forgotten? You're floating on Pacific swells now, where Polynesian navigators wore tattoos that served as permanent charts for reading ocean currents and finding distant islands. Since 1000 CE, Polynesian tattoo navigators incorporated geographical information into their body art, creating living maps that couldn't be lost or stolen during long ocean voyages. Master tattooists underwent training that required memorizing the ocean geography of hundreds of islands and the current patterns that connected them. Apprentices who made errors in navigational tattoos faced having their mistakes painfully corrected through multiple sessions, learning accuracy through personal consequence that would be permanent. The gentle tapping of traditional tattoo combs, creating permanent navigation aids. The soft chanting of geographical songs that accompanied each design. These skin maps enabled navigation across thousands of miles of open ocean without any external instruments or charts. What essential knowledge might we carry permanently with us if we were willing to write the most important information directly on our bodies? Dear listeners, you're in ancient Babylon's healing temples now, where physician-singers used specific melodies to treat illnesses by guiding patients into therapeutic dream states. Around 2300 BCE, Mesopotamian lullaby healers developed musical therapy techniques that used precisely pitched songs to induce healing sleep in patients with various ailments. These singing physicians trained for 15 years to master the vocal techniques required for therapeutic lullabies, learning to diagnose illnesses through patients' sleep responses to different melodies. Healers who sang incorrectly and disrupted patients' healing sleep faced temporary loss of their vocal privileges, maintaining silence for lunar months while observing other healers practice their craft. The gentle humming of healing melodies that seemed to synchronize with human heartbeats, the soft breathing of patients drifting into curative unconsciousness. These musical treatments influenced later developments in both medicine and music theory throughout the ancient Middle East. What healing might flow through the songs we sing to ourselves and others when the world feels too heavy to carry awake? You're walking Baltic coastlines now, where Germanic seers read the future through patterns visible in amber deposits, believing fossilized resin contained prophecies from ancient forests. Around 500 BCE, Germanic amber readers developed divination techniques that used prehistoric tree resin to predict personal destinies and tribal futures. Master readers underwent training that required spending years studying individual amber pieces, learning to interpret the patterns of trapped insects and air bubbles as prophetic messages. Students who misread amber signs during important tribal consultations faced working as common laborers, gathering raw amber from dangerous coastal areas during winter storms. The gentle clicking of amber pieces being sorted for divination purposes, the soft glow of fossilized resin when held up to firelight revealing ancient secrets. Amber reading influenced major Germanic tribal decisions, including migrations, warfare, and alliance formations that shaped early European political development. What stories from this distant past might be preserved in the objects around us, waiting for us to learn how to read their ancient messages? Hey friends, you're in mountain monasteries of Ethiopia now, where monk artists created illuminated manuscripts using pigments that literally glowed in darkness, making their holy books seem touched by divine light. Since 300 CE, Ethiopian manuscript illuminators developed techniques for incorporating bioluminescent materials into their religious artwork, creating books that appeared to emit their own spiritual radiance. Master illuminators underwent purification rituals lasting 40 days before touching sacred texts, preparing their hands and hearts for working with materials they believed contained divine essence. Apprentices who contaminated pigments or damaged manuscripts faced copying entire religious texts by hand without any decorative elements, learning respect for sacred materials through prolonged plain transcription work. The gentle scraping of quills creating words that would glow like stars. The soft whisper of pages turning to reveal artwork that seemed alive with inner light. These glowing manuscripts became treasured diplomatic gifts and pilgrimage destinations throughout the medieval Christian world. What light might our words carry if we wrote them with the same reverence these monks brought to every sacred letter? You're in a Mayan dental workshop now, where skilled craftsmen replaced human teeth with perfectly carved jade pieces, transforming smiles into displays of spiritual wealth and divine favor. Around 600 CE, Mayan jade dentists developed techniques for removing healthy teeth and replacing them with precisely carved gemstone alternatives that served as permanent status symbols. These dental artisans trained for decades to master the delicate procedures required for jade tooth implantation without causing infection or permanent injury. Patients who couldn't endure the painful jade installation process faced living with gaps in their smiles, marking them as spiritually or physically inadequate for the highest social positions. The gentle drilling of jade pieces being shaped to fit individual tooth sockets. The soft chanting of pain management prayers that accompanied each surgical procedure. Jade teeth enabled wealthy Maya to display their status permanently, creating smiles that literally gleamed with precious stone beauty. What permanent changes might we make to ourselves if we believed our bodies were canvases for displaying our most important values? Dear listeners, you're following reindeer herds across endless tundra now, where Siberian nomads developed communication techniques that enabled them to guide massive animal migrations across thousands of miles of Arctic landscape. For over 3,000 years, Siberian reindeer herders created vocal and gestural languages that reindeer understood, enabling precise control of huge herds during seasonal migrations. Master herders underwent training that required living exclusively with reindeer for years, learning to interpret and mimic the animal's natural communication methods. Students who failed to develop proper reindeer communication skills faced walking behind herds instead of riding, covering migration distances on foot until they earned the animal's trust and cooperation. The gentle lowing of reindeer responding to human vocal commands, the soft jingling of harness bells marking the rhythm of ancient migrations. This human-animal communication enabled survival in Arctic conditions that would have been impossible without reindeer partnership. What conversations might we have with other species if we took the time to learn their languages instead of expecting them to understand ours? You're in the ancient palace of Knossos now, where Minoan priestesses danced with live snakes, believing these sacred serpents whispered prophecies directly from the underworld goddess. Around 2000 BCE on the island of Crete, Minoan snake priestesses developed rituals that required handling venomous snakes during religious ceremonies. These serpent dancers underwent years of gradual exposure to snake venom, building immunity through controlled bites that slowly transformed their blood chemistry. Priestesses who showed fear during snake-handling rituals faced isolation in underground chambers with harmless snakes until they learned to move with serpentine grace. The soft hissing of sacred snakes coiling around human arms, the gentle swaying of priestesses moving in perfect harmony with serpentine rhythms. These snake ceremonies enabled communication with chthonic deities and provided medical knowledge about anti-venom preparation that influenced healing practices throughout the ancient Mediterranean. What wisdom might we gain if we learned to dance with the very things that frighten us most? Dear listeners, you're walking through misty Irish wetlands now, where Celtic druids used natural bog chemistry to preserve sacred objects and ritual offerings for thousands of years. Since 500 BCE, Gaelic bog keepers developed preservation techniques that used acidic peat waters to maintain wooden artifacts, leather goods, and ritual deposits in perfect condition. Master preservers underwent training that required spending months living in bog huts, learning to read water acidity levels and seasonal preservation cycles. Apprentices who contaminated bog waters or disturbed sacred deposits faced spending entire seasons harvesting peat by hand, learning reverence for marsh ecosystems through exhausting manual labor. The gentle bubbling of methane gases rising through ancient peat layers, the soft squelching of footsteps navigating treacherous wetland paths. Bog preservation enabled Celtic cultures to create permanent repositories for their most valuable religious and cultural artifacts. What treasures might we preserve for future generations if we learn to work with natural processes instead of against them? You're in ancient Ur's craftsman district now, where Sumerian artisans carved entire mythological narratives into tiny stone cylinders that served as both identification documents and portable art galleries. Around 3500 BCE, Mesopotamian seal carvers developed techniques for creating intricate relief sculptures on cylindrical stones smaller than modern thumbs. Master carvers trained for 20 years to develop the microscopic precision required for detailed narrative scenes that told complete stories when rolled across wet clay. Apprentices who created seals with unclear imagery faced recarving their work repeatedly until every figure was perfectly legible, learning patience through meticulous repetition. The delicate tapping of bronze tools creating worlds in miniature, the soft rolling of finished seals across clay documents bringing stories to life. These cylinder seals served as signatures, legal documents, and artistic expressions that influenced visual storytelling throughout ancient Near Eastern civilizations. What stories might we tell if we had to compress our entire lives into images small enough to fit in the palm of a hand? Hey friends, you're witnessing ancient Thracian funeral rites now, where professional mourners tattooed symbols of grief onto their bodies, creating permanent records of every death they witnessed. Around 600 BCE in the Balkans, Thracian tattoo mourners developed practices that required recording each funeral they attended through specific mourning tattoos that accumulated over their lifetimes. These grief keepers underwent training that included learning to endure pain without flinching, as their tattoos were created during active mourning ceremonies. Mourners who showed inadequate grief during tattooing processes faced having their mourning marks removed through painful scarification, forcing them to re-experience loss through physical correction. The rhythmic tapping of tattooing implements marking skin with permanent sorrow, the gentle chanting of funeral songs that accompanied each memorial design. These tattooed records enabled Thracian communities to maintain detailed genealogical information and honor their dead through living memorials. What losses might we honor more fully if we were willing to carry permanent reminders of everyone who shaped our lives? You're standing on Pacific coral reefs now, where oceanic musicians played shell trumpets with such skill that whales, dolphins, and sea turtles gathered to listen to their underwater concerts. Since 800 CE, oceanic shell trumpet players developed techniques for creating music that resonated through both air and water, enabling communication with marine life across vast ocean distances. Master trumpeters underwent training that required learning to hold their breath while playing underwater, creating melodies that traveled through liquid medium to ocean depths. Students who failed to master underwater playing techniques faced swimming to distant reefs to practice alone, returning only when they could summon marine life through their shell music. The haunting calls of conch shells echoing across endless blue waters, the gentle surfacing of curious whales drawn by ancient melodies. These musical practices enabled navigation, fishing success, and spiritual communication with oceanic deities throughout Pacific Island cultures. What songs might we sing that could bridge the gap between our world and the mysterious realms we've never learned to enter? Dear listeners, you're riding with nomadic Sarmatian cavalry now, where mounted archers lived so completely with their horses that dismounting was considered spiritually dangerous. Between 500 BCE, 400 CE, Sarmatian horse archers developed cavalry techniques that required permanent horseback living, with warriors spending years without touching the ground. Master riders underwent training that included sleeping, eating, and fighting while mounted, developing supernatural balance and archery skills that made them nearly invincible in battle. Warriors who fell from their horses during training faced walking on foot for lunar months, relearning to trust their mounts through enforced separation from equestrian life. The thundering of hooves across endless grasslands, the whistling of arrows released from horseback at full gallop. Sarmatian cavalry influenced military tactics throughout Europe and Asia, creating mobile warfare strategies that dominated steppe regions for centuries. What partnerships might we form if we learned to live so completely with our allies that we became extensions of each other? You're in a bustling Mayan market now, where cacao beans served as legal currency, but chocolate makers who consumed their own products faced economic ruin through edible temptation. Around 1000 CE, Maya chocolate coin makers developed techniques for processing cacao beans into standardized currency units that facilitated trade throughout Mesoamerica. Master coiners underwent training that required resisting the temptation to eat valuable cacao beans, developing willpower through constant exposure to delicious wealth. Apprentices who succumbed to chocolate cravings and consumed their currency faced working without payment until they replaced their eaten profits, learning self-control through economic consequence. The gentle roasting of cacao beans transforming into precious currency, the soft grinding of chocolate preparation that created both money and temptation. Cacao currency enabled complex trade relationships and created the world's first edible monetary system. What would we value differently if our money could literally nourish us, but only if we chose saving over consumption. Hey friends, you're descending into Nubian royal pyramids now, where hieroglyphic spells covered burial chamber walls, providing deceased pharaohs with instruction manuals for navigating the afterlife. Around 300 BCE, Nubian pyramid text scribes developed funerary literature that served as comprehensive guides for souls traveling through death realms. Master scribes underwent purification rituals lasting 60 days before entering burial chambers, ensuring their spiritual cleanliness wouldn't contaminate sacred texts. Apprentices who made errors in pyramid text transcription faced copying entire afterlife manuals repeatedly by candlelight, learning accuracy through prolonged exposure to death magic. The soft scraping of reed pens creating words of power on stone surfaces, the gentle flickering of oil lamps illuminating passages between worlds. These pyramid texts influenced Egyptian funerary practices and provided archaeological insights into Nubian beliefs about consciousness surviving bodily death. What instructions would we leave for ourselves if we believed our consciousness would continue its journey in realms beyond our current understanding? You're walking through ancient German forests now, where Celtic and Germanic tribes maintained sacred groves where cutting even a single branch without permission could result in ritual execution. Around 100 BCE, Germanic grove keepers developed forest conservation practices based on beliefs that specific trees housed tribal deities and ancestral spirits. Master keepers underwent training that required living alone in forests for years, learning to recognize which trees were spiritually occupied through subtle signs invisible to ordinary people. Apprentices who damaged sacred trees through ignorance or carelessness faced replanting entire groves by hand, spending decades nurturing new forests to replace their mistakes. The gentle rustling of leaves that seemed to whisper ancient secrets, the soft footsteps of grove keepers moving through sanctified woodland spaces. These sacred forests provided spiritual centers, legal courts, and environmental protection that influenced European forest management for centuries. What wisdom might grow if we treated every living thing as potentially sacred rather than automatically disposable? Dear listeners, you're diving into warm Phoenician waters now, where shell collectors risked their lives harvesting tiny mollusks that produced the most expensive dye in the ancient world. Between 1200 to 300 BCE, Phoenician murex shell divers developed underwater techniques for collecting thousands of spiny sea snails whose secretions created Tyrian purple dye. Master divers could hold their breath for over 5 minutes while extracting shells from dangerous underwater caves where predatory fish lurked. Novice divers who surfaced too quickly or lost valuable shells faced extended shore duty, repairing diving equipment, building underwater endurance through tedious preparation work. The gentle pressure of Mediterranean depths, the careful collection of shells that would create colors worthy of emperors. Phoenician purple dye became more valuable than gold, enabling trade dominance throughout the ancient Mediterranean and creating the world's first luxury fashion industry. What treasures might we discover if we dove deep enough beneath the surface of our familiar world? Hey friends, if you love this series of forgotten secrets from the ancient world, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful journeys through history's hidden chambers. You're standing on ancient Basque cliffs now, where maritime singers developed whale calls so perfect that migrating pods would change their routes to visit human coastal settlements. Around 800 CE, Basque whale singers created vocal techniques that mimicked cetacean communication, enabling direct interaction with migrating whale populations. Master singers underwent training that required learning dozens of whale dialects, spending years developing the vocal range necessary for cross-species conversation. Students who failed to achieve proper whale communication faced spending entire whaling seasons on land-based duties, missing ocean voyages until their singing abilities improved sufficiently. the haunting calls echoing across cold Atlantic waters, the gentle splashing of whales approaching shore in response to human melodies. These vocal partnerships enabled Basque whalers to achieve unprecedented hunting success while establishing sustainable relationships with whale populations that lasted for centuries. What conversations might we have with the natural world if we learned to speak in languages other than our own? Dear listeners, you're atop the Colossus of Rhodes now, where lighthouse keepers maintained eternal flames through techniques so secret that the light survived 300 years without ever being extinguished. Around 280 BCE, Rhodian flame keepers developed fire maintenance methods that kept lighthouse beacons burning continuously through storms, earthquakes, and siege warfare. Master keepers underwent training that required staying awake for weeks at a time, learning to tend flames during extreme weather conditions that would normally extinguish any fire. Apprentices who allowed flames to weaken or flicker faced climbing the lighthouse stairs repeatedly while carrying heavy fuel loads, building the endurance necessary for flame maintenance under dangerous conditions. The steady crackling of flames that guided ships across treacherous Mediterranean waters, the gentle whooshing of wind-resistant fire techniques that defied natural forces. These eternal flames enabled Rhodes to become the ancient world's most important maritime navigation center. What light do we carry that deserves to burn continuously, regardless of the storms that try to extinguish it? You're climbing ancient cliff faces in the American Southwest now, where Anasazi builders created entire cities carved directly into vertical rock walls hundreds of feet above desert floors. Between 1000 to 1300 CE, Anasazi cliff architects developed construction techniques that enabled building permanent settlements on seemingly impossible vertical surfaces. Master builders underwent training that required overcoming fear of heights while carrying heavy building materials up cliff faces using only rope and wooden ladders. Apprentices who showed fear or dropped building materials during cliff construction faced gathering replacement stones from canyon floors, learning courage through repeated exposure to dangerous heights. The gentle tapping of stone tools against cliff faces, the soft whisper of desert winds through multi-story cliff dwellings. These aerial cities provided perfect defense against enemies and extreme weather while creating architectural marvels that seemed to defy gravity itself. What heights might we reach if we stopped letting fear of falling prevent us from climbing toward our impossible dreams? Hey friends, you're in ancient Babylon's brewing temples now, where professional beer tasters risked their lives sampling sacred ales that could either grant divine wisdom or deliver fatal punishment from the gods. Around 2800 BCE, Mesopotamian beer judges developed palate training that enabled them to detect spiritual contamination in sacred brews meant for religious ceremonies. Master tasters underwent purification rituals lasting 40 days before sampling divine ales, cleansing their bodies to avoid corrupting holy fermentation with human impurity. Judges who misidentified contaminated beer or showed weakness during tastings faced consuming only bitter herbs for lunar months, resetting their palates through prolonged dietary penance. The gentle bubbling of fermentation vessels blessed by ancient prayers, the soft swishing of sacred ales being evaluated for divine approval. These beer judgments determined which brews were worthy of offerings to gods and which should be destroyed to prevent spiritual contamination. What divine taste might we develop if we approached the simplest acts of sustenance as conversations with sacred forces? You're walking through Scottish Highlands now, where Pictish builders created stone circles with astronomical alignments so precise they could predict eclipses centuries in advance. Around 500 CE, Pictish stone architects developed construction techniques that incorporated complex astronomical calculations into megalithic monuments. Master builders underwent training that required memorizing celestial cycles spanning multiple generations, learning to position massive stones with mathematical precision that wouldn't be understood again until modern astronomy. Apprentices who miscalculated stone positions faced dismantling and rebuilding entire sections of stone circles, learning accuracy through repeated heavy labor that could take years to complete. The gentle scraping of massive stones being positioned with supernatural precision, the soft whisper of highland winds through monuments that marked time itself. These stone circles served as permanent calendars that enabled Pictish communities to predict and prepare for celestial events that influenced agricultural and religious activities. What patterns might we recognize if we learned to think in timescales that extend far beyond our individual lifespans? Dear listeners, you're traveling ancient trade routes now, where Sogdian polyglots mastered dozens of languages to facilitate commerce between civilizations that had never communicated directly. Between 400–1000 CE, Sogdian translators developed linguistic abilities that enabled them to serve as communication bridges across the entire Silk Road network. Master linguists underwent training that required living with different cultural groups for years at a time, absorbing not just languages but entire worldviews necessary for accurate cross-cultural translation. Students who mistranslated important commercial or diplomatic negotiations faced working as unpaid porters on caravan routes, learning languages through immersive exposure while performing manual labor. The gentle murmur of multiple languages being spoken simultaneously in busy caravan stops, the soft scratching of translators writing contracts in scripts from various civilizations. These linguistic bridges enabled trade relationships that connected Europe, Asia, and Africa through networks of mutual understanding. What worlds might open to us if we learned to communicate in languages that express realities we've never experienced? You're in ancient Nubian temples now, where Meroitic scribes created a writing system so unique that their texts remain unreadable despite centuries of scholarly attempts at translation. Around 300 BCE, Meroitic scribes developed an alphabetic writing system that recorded the Kingdom of Kush's governmental, religious, and literary traditions. Master scribes underwent training that required memorizing thousands of symbol combinations and their contextual meanings through oral tradition that died with the kingdom's fall. Apprentices who made errors in royal inscriptions faced recopying entire temple walls by candlelight, learning precision through prolonged exposure to sacred texts under difficult conditions. The gentle scraping of reed pens creating symbols that would outlast their civilization. The soft whisper of papyrus scrolls containing stories that may never be understood again. These undeciphered texts represent one of history's greatest linguistic mysteries, preserving African wisdom in a code that refuses to reveal its secrets. What messages might we be writing today that future civilizations will find impossible to understand, despite our certainty that they're perfectly clear? You're in ancient Tuscany's temples now, where Etruscan haruspices read sheep livers like geographical maps, believing each organ contained a miniature replica of the heavens. Around 600 BCE, Etruscan liver readers developed divination techniques that treated animal organs as three-dimensional representations of cosmic geography. Master diviners underwent training that required memorizing the spiritual significance of every anatomical feature, learning to interpret divine messages through careful examination of liver textures and coloration. Students who misread liver signs during important state ceremonies faced dietary restrictions that limited them to consuming only organ meats for months, developing visceral sensitivity through prolonged exposure to the materials they needed to interpret. The soft whisper of bronze knives revealing divine geography in fresh tissue. The gentle murmur of priests consulting liver maps to determine governmental policy. These anatomical readings influenced major political decisions throughout the Roman Republic and helped shape early European approaches to religious authority. What hidden maps might we discover if we learned to read the patterns written in the most intimate structures of life itself? Hey friends, you're floating on Pacific waters now, where Polynesian navigators could locate distant islands by feeling wave patterns with their bodies, reading ocean swells like textbooks written in water. Since 1000 BCE, Polynesian wave readers developed techniques that enabled navigation across thousands of miles of open ocean using only their skin's sensitivity to water movement. Master navigators underwent training that required lying beneath outrigger canoes for hours, learning to interpret how waves reflected off distant islands created interference patterns in ocean swells. Students who failed to develop proper wave sensitivity faced being towed behind canoes during long voyages, learning ocean literacy through prolonged physical contact with wave patterns. The gentle rocking of ocean swells carrying information about invisible islands, the soft splash of waves against hulls that revealed hidden geographical secrets. These wave-reading techniques enabled the settlement of Pacific islands across oceanic distances that seemed impossible without modern navigation instruments. What information might the world be constantly sending us through channels we've forgotten how to receive? You're in ancient Balkan villages now, where Illyrian healers used musical instruments to entrance venomous snakes, transforming deadly encounters into therapeutic sessions that cured various ailments. Around 400 BCE, Illyrian snake musicians developed techniques that used specific rhythms and frequencies to calm aggressive serpents while extracting their venom for medicinal purposes. Master charmers underwent training that required building immunity to multiple snake venoms through controlled exposure over many years. Students who failed to maintain proper musical timing during snake handling faced spending seasons in mountain caves with harmless snakes, learning rhythm and patience through extended isolation with serpentine teachers. The hypnotic melodies that seemed to synchronize with serpentine movement patterns, the gentle scraping of traditional instruments creating music that bridged species barriers. These snake healing sessions provided communities with anti-venom supplies and therapeutic treatments that influenced Balkan folk medicine for centuries. What harmony might we find with the dangerous forces in our lives if we approached them with music instead of fear? You're in ancient Bulgarian mountains now, where Thracian warriors believed eating gold flakes would make their bodies invincible, transforming precious metal into supernatural protection. Around 500 BCE, Thracian gold eaters developed rituals that required consuming thin gold leaf before major battles, believing the metal would coat their internal organs with divine armor. Master warriors underwent training that included gradually increasing gold consumption over years, building tolerance for metallic ingestion that could poison untrained bodies. Apprentices who showed weakness or refused gold consumption faced fighting in battles without any protective metal, learning courage through vulnerability while their comrades enjoyed supernatural confidence. The soft crackling of gold leaf dissolving on tongues like divine communion, the gentle scraping of precious metal being prepared for warrior consumption. These gold-eating rituals created psychological advantages that made Thracian warriors legendary for their fearlessness in combat throughout the ancient Mediterranean. What strength might we find if we learned to consume the very things we value most instead of hoarding them? Dear listeners, you're on the ancient island of Malta now, where Neolithic builders supposedly moved massive stones through harmonic frequencies that made granite weightless. Around 3600 BCE, Maltese temple architects developed acoustic techniques that supposedly enabled moving megalithic blocks weighing several tons through coordinated group singing. Master builders underwent vocal training that required learning specific frequencies that allegedly resonated with stone molecular structure, creating vibrations that reduced gravitational effects. Students who failed to achieve proper harmonic alignment faced quarrying replacement stones by hand, learning the importance of vocal precision through exhausting manual labor. The resonant humming of human voices synchronized with stone movement, the gentle scraping of massive blocks sliding effortlessly across temple floors. These acoustic construction methods enabled creation of some of the world's oldest freestanding stone structures, predating Stonehenge by over 1,000 years. What impossible feats might become possible if we learn to work in perfect harmony with natural forces we don't yet understand? You're atop ancient ziggurats in Mesopotamia now, where Sumerian priests conducted wedding ceremonies between themselves and planets, believing human celestial marriages could influence cosmic events. Around 3000 BCE, Sumerian stellar priests developed astronomical rituals that involved formal marriage ceremonies with Venus, Mars, and other visible planets during specific celestial alignments. Master priests underwent purification rituals lasting entire seasons before celestial weddings, cleansing themselves to become worthy partners for divine astronomical bodies. Priests who performed marriage ceremonies incorrectly or showed disrespect to their planetary spouses faced spending years in underground chambers, learning humility through isolation from the very sky they sought to marry. The gentle chanting of wedding vows spoken to planets hanging in desert night skies. The soft rustling of ceremonial robes worn for cosmic matrimony. These celestial marriages influenced agricultural timing, military campaigns, and governmental decisions throughout early Mesopotamian civilization. What relationships might we form with the vast forces around us if we approach them as partners rather than subjects to be studied? Hey friends, you're at the bottom of South America now, where Patagonian shamans developed communication techniques for conversing with the relentless winds that shaped their harsh landscape. Since 1000 BCE, Patagonian wind speakers created vocal methods that enabled them to interpret and influence the constant gales that dominated southern Argentine and Chilean territories. Master shamans underwent training that required spending months alone on exposed plains, learning to read wind patterns that predicted weather, animal migrations, and seasonal changes. Students who failed to develop wind sensitivity faced being staked to the ground during major storms, learning atmospheric communication through forced exposure to elemental fury. The haunting whistling of Patagonian winds carrying messages across endless grasslands. The gentle flapping of shamanic clothing responding to atmospheric conversations. These wind-reading abilities enabled Patagonian peoples to navigate and survive in some of Earth's most challenging weather conditions. What voices might we hear if we learn to listen to the forces that surround us constantly but rarely speak our language? You're in ancient Harappan cities now, where Indus Valley artisans created thousands of seals containing script that remains completely undeciphered despite centuries of scholarly investigation. Around 2600 BCE, Indus Valley seal carvers developed a writing system that recorded the administrative, religious, and commercial activities of one of humanity's earliest urban civilizations. Master carvers underwent training that required memorizing hundreds of symbol combinations and their meanings through oral tradition that died completely when their civilization collapsed. Apprentices who carved symbols incorrectly faced remaking entire batches of seals by hand, learning precision through repetitive correction of their mysterious mistakes. The delicate tapping of copper tools creating symbols that would outlast their civilization. The soft scraping of steatite being shaped into eternal mysteries. These undeciphered seals represent one of archaeology's greatest puzzles, preserving the voice of an advanced civilization in a code that refuses to reveal its secrets. What messages are we creating today that might become equally mysterious to future generations who find our artifacts but cannot understand our intentions? Dear listeners, you're riding across Asian steppes now, where Scythian craftswomen created felt so dense it could stop arrows, transforming sheep wool into battlefield protection for both horses and riders. Around 700 BCE, Scythian felt makers developed textile techniques that produced material strong enough to serve as effective armor while remaining light enough for nomadic cavalry warfare. Master felt workers underwent training that required developing the arm strength necessary for compressing wool into battle-ready density through repeated trampling and pressing. Apprentices who produced inadequate felt faced wearing their inferior products during actual raids, learning quality control through personal vulnerability to enemy weapons. The rhythmic trampling of wet wool being compressed into protective textile, the gentle steaming of felt drying in cold steppe winds. This textile armor enabled Scythian cavalry to dominate vast territories from Eastern Europe to Central Asia while maintaining the mobility essential for nomadic lifestyle. What protection might we weave from the simplest materials if we learned to transform softness into strength through patient compression? You're deep in Guatemalan jungles now, where Maya chronologists created calendars so accurate they could predict celestial events thousands of years into the future with mathematical precision that rivals modern astronomy. Around 600 CE, Maya calendar keepers developed timekeeping systems that incorporated multiple overlapping cycles spanning thousands of years, creating mathematical frameworks that tracked cosmic time with supernatural accuracy. Master chronologists underwent training that required memorizing astronomical calculations spanning multiple lifetimes, learning to think in temporal scales that transcended individual human existence. Students who miscalculated calendar correlations faced copying astronomical tables repeatedly until their mathematical errors were completely eliminated through exhaustive repetition. The soft scratching of obsidian styluses creating numbers that would outlast empires. The gentle whisper of bark paper recording time itself. Maya calendars influenced religious ceremonies, agricultural planning, and political decisions, while creating one of humanity's most sophisticated approaches to understanding cosmic time. What patterns might we recognize if we learn to think in timescales that extend far beyond our individual lives into cosmic rhythms we barely perceive? Hey friends, you're in Mediterranean workshops now, where Phoenician artisans created glass beads so beautiful and standardized they became the world's first international currency, enabling trade from Britain to India. Around 1000 BCE, Phoenician bead makers developed glassworking techniques that produced ornamental currency accepted throughout the known world. Master craftsmen underwent training that required learning to work molten glass in extreme heat, while maintaining the precise standards necessary for international trade acceptance. Apprentices who created irregular or flawed beads faced melting down their mistakes and starting over repeatedly, learning perfection through wasteful repetition of failed attempts. The gentle roar of furnaces heating sand into liquid beauty, the soft tinkling of finished beads being sorted for global commerce. These glass currencies enabled trade relationships that connected distant civilizations and created the ancient world's first truly international economic system. What beauty might we create that could serve as bridges between peoples who have never learned to trust each other's differences? You're on remote Easter Island now, where Polynesian sculptors created nearly 900 massive statues and then moved them across the island through rocking techniques that made multi-ton figures appear to walk. Around 1400 CE, Rapa Nui statue movers developed transportation methods that used coordinated rocking motions to move massive moai statues across the island without rollers or sledges. Master movers underwent training that required perfect timing and strength coordination among teams of dozens of people working in absolute synchronization. Workers who broke rhythm during statue transportation faced carving replacement statues by hand, learning the cost of individual mistakes that could damage irreplaceable cultural artifacts. The rhythmic chanting that coordinated statue movement across volcanic landscapes, the gentle scraping of stone giants sliding across ancient roadways. These walking statues created one of archaeology's most fascinating mysteries while demonstrating human cooperation on a scale that transformed an entire island into a sculptural masterpiece. What giants might we move together if we learned to work in perfect rhythm instead of pulling in different directions? Dear listeners, you're standing at the edge of legend now, where the last keepers of Atlantis supposedly preserved their civilization's wisdom in crystal libraries that sank beneath Atlantic waves, taking humanity's greatest knowledge into oceanic silence. According to Plato's account from 360 BCE, Atlantean memory keepers maintained crystalline archives containing technological and spiritual knowledge that surpassed all other ancient civilizations. These final librarians supposedly underwent lifetime training that prepared them to preserve essential wisdom even as their continent faced catastrophic destruction. Keepers who attempted to save themselves rather than their precious knowledge faced eternal duty as guardians of sunken libraries, protecting wisdom beneath the waves until humanity became worthy of receiving it again. The gentle humming of crystal storage systems resonating with infinite knowledge, the soft whisper of waves covering secrets too powerful for unprepared minds. Whether myth or memory, Atlantis represents humanity's eternal longing for lost wisdom and our hope that somewhere, ancient knowledge waits patiently for our return. What wisdom have we lost that might still be waiting beneath the surface of our forgetting, ready to emerge when we finally learn to dive deep enough to find it? And so, dear friends, our journey through 100 forgotten secrets comes to a gentle close. As you drift toward sleep, may you carry with you the whispered wisdom of ancient souls who knew that some truths are best shared in the quiet moments between waking and dreams. Sweet dreams, and remember, the past is never really gone. It lives on in every story we choose to tell. Hey friends, if you love this series of forgotten secrets from the ancient world, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful journeys through history's hidden chambers.